Back in November 2020, Apple had released the M1 chip, which quickly became a game changer in the industry. Ever since then, every new member of the M1 family has increased the standard set for chip used in PCs. The newest M2 chip from Apple, which will debut in 2022's MacBook Pro, promises to offer an enhanced graphics performance. Though the question is the update actually worthwhile if you've already got an M1, M1 Pro, or M1 Max graphics? Well, let's find out. Back when Apple's Silicon made its debut with the M1 chip 2 years ago, it was evident that moving away from Intel CPUs and Macs would need more than just a single line of processors, which were similar to the A-series chips that power iPhones and iPads. One chip cannot accommodate all of Apple's different Mac configurations. So, Apple ended up introducing the M2 at the WWDC a month ago. The M2 is a true second-gen chunk of silicon, which will replace the M1 processors, which had first been released in the MacBook Air and MacBook Pro in 2020. Considering the standards of 2020, the M1 is an exceptionally competent processor, yet the field of silicon engineering advances at a dizzying speed. As a Mac user, you should thus be considering whether or not upgrading from a laptop powered by the first-gen Apple Silicon to the new M2 processor would be worth it. Basically, for this video, we're going to be getting pretty technical for you to comprehend the difference between the two chips and see what those differences entail for you in the process. The processing improvements. At the first iteration of the M1, the M2 is initially only going to be available in a single base version. However, upgraded iterations such as the Pro, Max, and Ultra versions will more than likely become available in the future. From the base model that powers the $1,000 MacBook Air up to the M1 Ultra that is offered by the higher configurations at $4,000 with the Mac Studio, numerous distinction M1 models exist. With these various variations of the M1, you have diverse performance capabilities while employing a common microprocessor design, which the semiconductor industry calls the 5nm production process. The M2 chip is a true second-gen chip because it utilizes a new production process, which Apple refers to in a somewhat mysterious manner as quote-unquote second-generation 5nm tech. Chip firms are usually known for the superior intelligence. For example, AMD frequently referring to their generation advancements as Zen Plus rather than Zen second generation. The M2 backs up the claims of being a second-gen chip with some slick new specs. To begin with, it's got a much more significant number of transistors, which are the fundamental components of a microprocessor than the M1 has. It's a rise of about 25%, bringing the total number of microtransistors in the M2 to 20 billion. Yes, that's right, billion with a B. This gives the silicon engineers at Apple the ability to improve the aspects of the chip which users care the most about. Memory is a typical bottleneck issue for just about every modern computing system. The M2 does boast a larger memory ceiling and a much higher memory bandwidth than the M1, 24 gigs against 16, which could enable everything from fewer hangs and crashes to faster app loading times. Secondly, it appears that the new manufacturing process makes it possible for some of the M2's cores to operate at clock speeds which are far faster than those of the M1's. In addition, the design of the chip is divided, as it was previously, between cores that are higher performance and high efficiency cores. These cores are dynamically deployed into various sorts of workloads. Efficiency cores are slower and better suited for less demanding processes, while the performance cores are faster and they're the best for demanding tasks. Apple asserts that the M2's performance cores are quote-unquote faster and that its efficiency cores are quote-unquote significantly enhanced, claiming that 18% increases can be seen in performance for many multi-thread workloads. This even includes activities like rendering videos or editing photos. Graphic enhancements. Although the processing cores of the initial M2 chip are achieving higher speeds, the total number of cores on the chip remains the same at a total of 8. In the meantime, the graphics section of the chip actually expanded, reaching a maximum of 10 cores, which is an increase of 2 cores from the M1. The increased memory bandwidth of the M2 even helps the graphics cores because computing resources are shared between the entire chip. Apple claims that the M2 has 25% higher graphics performance than the M1 at the same power level and up to 35% better when operating at its maximum power. Let's look at some benchmarks to determine how much of an improvement that the M2 processor brings to the graphics, as well as gaming capabilities of Macs. PCMag's benchmarks indicate that the two models produce results which really aren't that far from one another, particularly when compared to the more M2 models, which are more powerful than the Pro and Max M1 models. They selected a late 2020 M1 version of the Apple MacBook Pro 13-inch, which is the most directly comparable model for the Apple MacBook Pro 13-inch with the new M2 2022 chip. They put the GPU through the pace by having it perform a sample rendering workload in Blender. The new chip's performance was inferior to that of the M1 Pro and the M1 Max, meaning that earlier processors are a much safer choice for workstation-style graphics performance. But the new chip fared much better when it came to gaming in the real world. They utilized one of the few AAA titles available to the Mac, Rise of the Tomb Raider. Although the M2 outperformed the M1 in terms of performance, it did not do so by a significant enough margin to actually pose a challenge to the M1 Pro or M1 Max. Having said that, the M2's GPU was able to maintain frame rates of 50 or more per second, even at higher detail levels. Hence, it's certainly capable of running at least some of the restricted library of games that are available to Macs for the long as the resolution is kept to a respectable level. Great graphics potential, but where's the games? The most significant obstacle for many Apple fans who want to play games is not really the system's performance. Rather, it's the absence of support for the majority of the most recent big-budget titles. Apple's gaming prospects have always been complicated because there's fewer games available for Mac OS compared to the number of titles available for Windows. The move away from Intel to the Mac has worsened things because MacBooks are no longer sharing the same processing architecture and graphics engines as the Windows gaming rigs, which makes it even more difficult for Apple to compete in the gaming market. While it is possible to ease some of these issues by running games in Rosetta 2, or even just by installing Windows using technology like Parallels Desktop, these solutions aren't always smooth and flawless. Apple has tried to broaden its appeal to gamers, and it brought some of the iPad's gaming success to the Mac by introducing what is called Apple Arcade. Despite these efforts, though, the gaming market is still somewhat specialized, and there's a minimal overlap between Mac and Windows game libraries. In conclusion, Apple offers fantastic laptops with very sharp graphics, which is especially beneficial for design professionals and basically anyone who creates digital content. Still, gamers will probably continue to use Windows for the foreseeable future. The M2 is a significant improvement. When everything's considered, it's difficult not to be amazed by how nicely Apple's positioned the M2 chip. The new processor is a significant improvement over the M1, and as the first example of Apple's second generation of in-house CPU design, it's a winner in every aspect. However, it does accomplish this without interfering with the functionality of the M1 Pro or the M1 Max, allowing the more powerful CPU to continue being used to power premium editions of the MacBook Pro. Although we'll likely see other M2 variations shortly, more likely Pro and Max versions, it's possible that we'll not see them until 2023 at the earliest. Apple does want to continue selling professional computers like MacBook Pro 14 and the M1 Max MacBook Pro 16, but it can't do so if the MacBook Pro 13 is much more affordable and contains a much more decent and superior processor. People which do require graphical horsepower can end up finding that the M2 is an update that's great to have, but it's not strictly necessary for their needs. The M2-based MacBook Pro is only worth acquiring if you already require a new MacBook. The 2022 MacBook Air offers purchases not only a new processor, but also a somewhat more substantial redesign to persuade them to purchase. So there you have it. What do you guys think about the Apple M2? Let us know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, then please consider giving it a big thumbs up. Also, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content just like this, and don't forget to ding that notification bell so you don't miss out on any more content updates from us. Until next time, folks, stay safe and stay informed.